Dominic Ashford was not a man accustomed to compromise. At 35, he ruled his empire with ice in his veins and numbers in his mind. CEO of Ashford Enterprises, he operated in mergers, acquisitions, and silent wars waged in boardrooms. He didn't date. He didn't entertain scandals. And he certainly didn't believe in marriage. So when the conditions of his grandfather's will were revealed, requiring him to marry within 1 week or forfeit his controlling shares, Dominic didn't panic. He calculated. He analyzed. He strategized. Marriage wasn't romance. It was logistics. He instructed his legal team to draw up prenups, contracts, backup clauses. He reviewed portfolios of eligible socialites, actresses, even heiresses who had graced red carpets and tabloids. None interested him. Then he saw her. Sky Rivers wasn't in any curated portfolio. She appeared uninvited, protesting in front of the Ashford Foundation Gala, clutching a homemade sign. Ashford profits from pollution. Dominic, walking past with a practiced smile and a tuxedo worth more than her yearly rent, paused. She didn't flinch under his stare. Her green eyes met his like she had nothing to lose. "What's your name?" he asked her, more curious than irritated. "Sky," she answered. "You should remember it. You'll be hearing it again." He did remember it, and he had her researched by nightfall. Sky was a grassroots activist and environmental scientist from Vermont. She ran a barely funded nonprofit called Earthward, exposing industrial contamination in rural areas. She had no connections, no family wealth, but she had defiance, and more importantly, authenticity. That's what Dominic needed. When she arrived at Ashford Tower the next day, summoned by a cryptic email promising corporate discussion, she expected a PR stunt. She didn't expect a marriage proposal. "I'll pay you $5 million, Dominic said calmly, sliding a contract across his desk. "You'll be my wife for 12 months. Publicly convincing, legally binding. After that, we walk away. You keep the money, and I'll fund Earthward for 10 years. Sky blinked. "You're joking. I never joke about contracts." She stood. "You want to buy an environmentalist so you can keep poisoning rivers? I want to fulfill a legal requirement. You get what you want. I get what I need." Her instinct said no. Every cell in her body rejected the idea of playing pretend with the man whose company she'd fought to expose. But the money, her nonprofit, could finally make a difference. Real change. Real action. So she signed. The wedding was quick, surrounded by lawyers, stylists, photographers, and questions. Sky wore a borrowed designer dress. Dominic wore indifference. The headline screamed, "Cold Tycoon Marries Fiery Eco-Activist. Real or PR?" Behind closed doors, the arrangement was simple: separate bedrooms, separate lives, scheduled joint appearances. Neither owed the other anything, except civility. But civility proved harder than expected. Sky was outspoken, passionate, often reckless. She questioned every meeting, every partnership, every silent deal Dominic made. At first, he dismissed her critiques with cool smirks. But when she exposed an offshore dumping scandal linked to one of Ashford's holdings, he started to listen. And when she stood beside him at a shareholders' summit and called out his board for greenwashing, something changed in the way he looked at her. Not with annoyance, but with respect. Sky, in turn, began to see more than the ice. She saw the long nights Dominic worked alone, the rare moments of hesitation behind his confident facade, the way he carried responsibility like a second skin. And though she fought it, something softened. The first time he touched her hand in public, for show, of course, his fingers lingered longer than necessary. And when they smiled for the cameras, it wasn't entirely fake. At a charity event 3 months into their marriage, a guest sneered at Sky's presence, calling her Dominic's pet activist. Dominic heard it and stepped in. "She's the only reason half of this event isn't hypocritical," he said. "You should be thanking her." That night, he poured her a drink in the penthouse kitchen and said quietly, "You're not what I expected." She looked at him over the rim of her glass. "Neither are you." From that moment, their détente turned into slow-burning tension. Stolen glances, lingering silences, heated debates that ended with breathless pauses neither could explain. Sky refused to fall for him. She reminded herself every day that it was fake, that his world didn't change people. But he had begun to change policies, to reallocate funding, to ask questions. And one night, he asked her something else. "What if we weren't pretending anymore?" She laughed at first, Don't joke. I'm not joking. Dominic, this isn't real. I want it to be. He kissed her, carefully at first, like he was afraid she'd run. Then fully, like he'd been waiting all his life. They became real and secret. Behind closed doors, they were no longer cold CEO and rebel activist, but two people discovering that they could, against all odds, belong to each other. And then the week of their one-year deadline came. According to the original contract, they were supposed to divorce and go their separate ways. But Dominic never sent the papers, and Sky never asked for them. Blake, Dominic's cousin, tried to contest the marriage, claiming it was a sham. He hired investigators, dug up emails, old footage of Sky protesting the Ashford name. In court, they sat side by side. Sky squeezed Dominic's hand before taking the stand. This started as a contract, she admitted. But if you think the last year wasn't real, you haven't seen us together. You haven't seen the changes this man made. Not for PR, but because he started to care. The judge ruled in Dominic's favor. They left the courtroom in silence, hands still entwined. On the sidewalk outside, Dominic turned to her. I never said thank you, he murmured. For what? For ruining my life, he said with a smile. And making it better. She stepped closer. So what now? No more contracts. No deadlines. Just us. If you'll have me. Sky laughed through tears. Only if we build green factories. He pulled her close. Deal. And this time, there were no terms, no lawyers, no press. Just two people who met by chance, collided by force, and stayed by choice. They didn't throw another wedding. There were no doves, no press invites, no designer gowns or diamond press releases. Just a cabin in Vermont with wildflowers in her hair, a quiet justice of the peace, and the sound of river water flowing outside, clean, unpoisoned, thanks to the reforms Dominic had greenlit 6 months earlier. They kissed without cameras, danced without music, and laughed like they hadn't laughed in years. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. Back in New York, the shift was undeniable. Ashford Enterprises began phasing out its least sustainable operations. Sky took a formal role as Director of Environmental Strategy. The board hated it at first, but the public didn't. Shareholder value soared. Consumer trust climbed. What had started as performative became profitable, and then personal. Dominic no longer walked into meetings alone. He arrived with Sky, still blunt, still wild, still uncompromising. And she wasn't afraid to call out bad deals, even in front of CEOs twice her age. The thing was, Dominic backed her every time. They argued often, sometimes passionately, sometimes cruelly, but always honestly. He was still sharp, often cold, sometimes ruthless. But the edges had softened, because now, there was someone who saw through the marble and steel and money. Someone who reminded him what it meant to build, not just dominate. Sky wasn't easy. She never tried to be. She refused to play trophy wife. She wore recycled fabrics to galas and called out hypocrisy in televised panels. But she smiled more now, because despite everything, she'd found something she never expected, a partner who listened, changed, fought beside her. And Dominic? He didn't believe in fate or fairy tales, but he did believe in her. One night, months after their quiet second wedding, she found him on the balcony of their penthouse. He was holding a letter, his grandfather's will. You ever wonder, he said, if he planned all this? Sky took the paper from his hand and glanced at the clause that had started it all. The heir must marry within 7 days to claim his legacy. I don't know, she said, folding the page. But I'm glad you listened. He turned to her, brushing a curl from her face. You know, you never actually said I love you. She smirked. Neither did you. I do, he said softly. God help me, I really do. Her lips parted slightly, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. No steel, no contracts. Then she leaned in, forehead touching his. Then I guess you better keep this river clean, Ashford. He laughed. For once, fully. From scandal to sincerity. From convenience to connection. From contract to commitment. What started as a cold arrangement had melted into something neither of them had expected. Love, not loud, but steady. Earned. Fought for. The kind that didn't need headlines. The kind that stayed. The seasons shifted. Winter turned to spring. Their penthouse, once a monument to silence and solitude, now echoed with the low hum of music, the rustle of books she scattered everywhere, the occasional shouting match over policy drafts. Sky turned one of the guest rooms into a seedling lab. Dominic didn't argue. He just had the HVAC adjusted for optimal light. They traveled to her hometown in Vermont, where townspeople still side-eyed him like he might buy the mountain. To Davos, where she tore into a panel of fossil fuel lobbyists with him watching, jaw clenched in admiration. To small towns where Earthward built clean water systems with Ashford funding, quietly, without photo ops. He didn't seek redemption, but she gave him purpose. And she didn't believe in permanence, but he gave her stability. One night, after a speech where she announced their joint climate initiative, one that would invest billions in clean energy startups, Sky stood backstage, wiping her hands on her jeans. Cameras flashed in the distance, and Dominic walked toward her through the corridor with the practiced stride of someone who'd spent his life owning rooms. But he looked at her like she was the only thing in it. 3 journalists asked if we were expecting, she said, half laughing. Dominic raised an eyebrow. Are we? She shook her head. Not yet. He nodded, a glimmer of something unspoken in his eyes. Would you want to? Sky leaned back against the wall, breath catching. Someday. Not because the world says so, but maybe, when the timing feels like ours. He stepped forward, brushing his fingers along her wrist. Everything I've built, none of it mattered before you. Still doesn't matter, if you turn Earthward into some PR stunt. I won't. You swear. I swear on the rivers, he murmured, and she laughed. A real laugh. Because it was absurdly, stupidly poetic for a man who used to sign billion-dollar deals without blinking. They didn't rush. They didn't pretend to be perfect. Some mornings, Sky walked out in fury over a corporate partner Dominic hadn't yet dropped. Some nights, he fell asleep reading her policy memos, glasses crooked on his face. But they always came back to each other. One evening, a letter arrived from Blake. It was bitter, of course. His final attempt to accuse them of fraud had failed in court. The company had cut him off. The letter reeked of resentment. Dominic handed it to Sky, who read it over with a bemused smirk. Funny, she said. He still thinks we fooled the whole world. Dominic reached for her hand. We fooled ourselves first. Yeah, she whispered. But maybe your grandfather wasn't trying to trap you. Maybe he was trying to save you. Dominic looked out the window, where the city lights burned like stars, and nodded. I think he did. The empire didn't crumble. It evolved. Ashford Enterprises slowly became a name people no longer hissed at in protests. Sky remained its conscience, relentless and fierce. And Dominic, still cold at the edges, never stopped being the man who made hard calls. But he had learned how to listen, how to bend, how to change. And late at night, when the world was quiet, they'd lie tangled in each other's arms and talk about the life they never planned, but somehow chose anyway. 2 people who collided by necessity, stayed by choice, and loved. Unexpectedly, irrevocably, not in headlines or contracts, but in the quiet, daily moments where truth lived. Years passed, but not quietly. Dominic and Sky became something of an anomaly in the public eye. Power couples came and went, but theirs had roots. Not just in glossy magazine covers or televised panels, but in actions. Sky refused every branding deal. Dominic rejected mergers that went against her environmental criteria. They built something most people didn't understand. A legacy, not of dominance, but of accountability. By their 4th anniversary, Earthward had grown from a grassroots nonprofit into a global watchdog, with satellites tracking deforestation and a legal arm powerful enough to go up against multinational giants. All funded, quietly and without credit, by Ashford Capital. Dominic didn't need his name on it. He had something better, Sky's trust. One summer evening, they returned to Vermont for a break, far from the corporate noise. Dominic chopped wood in an ill-fitting flannel shirt, while Sky sat on the porch with a steaming mug and a stack of climate reports. Did you just glare at the axe? She teased. It's inefficient, he muttered. We should invest in a better one. She grinned. There's the CEO I married. He tossed the axe down, came up the steps, and pulled her to her feet. And there's the woman who terrifies every board member I know. I'm proud of that. You should be. They kissed under a faded sky, fireflies blinking around them, the silence of the woods thick with unsaid things. For a man who once lived in sterile skyscrapers and boardrooms, Dominic had learned the value of silence and the rare, glowing peace of not needing to control it. Inside the cabin, Sky pulled a small envelope from her coat pocket. Handwritten. No logos. She handed it to him. "What's this?" "A gift," she said. "Read it." He unfolded the paper. It was a sonogram. For a moment, the world stopped. No number, no clause, no vote had ever rendered him speechless. But this did. "You're sure?" She nodded. 10 weeks. He lowered the paper, looked at her like he might shatter if he blinked. "And you're okay?" "A little nauseous. A lot terrified. But yeah." He took her hand slowly. "You're going to be an amazing mother." She raised an eyebrow. "And you?" "I'll try not to schedule their first board meeting before kindergarten." She laughed, and then they both cried, wrapped in something far bigger than either of them knew how to name. Not just love, not just parenthood, but proof that people could change, that cold could thaw, that sometimes the most improbable unions grew the strongest roots. When their daughter was born, tiny, loud, and red-haired like Sky, Dominic held her with awe. He'd held contracts worth billions, empires in fragile balance. But nothing had ever felt this dangerous, or this perfect. They named her Lark, after the bird Sky said she once watched fight off a hawk 3 times its size. "Persistent little thing," she told the nurse. "Just like her parents," Dominic added, eyes never leaving the baby. In time, Lark grew up between boardrooms and riverbanks. She built Lego wind turbines and scribbled on IPO documents. Dominic taught her how to negotiate bedtime. Sky taught her how to never take no for an answer if it meant protecting what mattered. And every year, on the anniversary of that strange, contractual courthouse wedding, Dominic gave Sky the same thing. A single page. Blank. "What's this?" she always asked. "A new contract," he said every time. "No terms. No clauses. Just one line to sign if you still want this life." And every year, she signed it. No hesitation. Because theirs wasn't the kind of love that began with flowers or grand gestures. It was the kind born in conflict, tempered in truth, written in actions, not promises. The cold billionaire had found warmth. The activist had found someone who listened. And the life they built, unlikely, messy, fierce, was more real than either of them had ever dared hope for. They had chosen each other. Every day, and they always would. It was autumn again in Vermont. The trees had turned to fire, amber, gold, scarlet, and the wind carried that quiet chill that always made Sky want to light a fire and stay in with tea and thick socks. Lark, now 6, was out collecting leaves in the yard with a magnifying glass and a very serious face. Dominic sat nearby on the porch steps, watching her with that quiet awe he never voiced aloud, but always carried in his eyes. Sky stepped outside with a blanket draped over her shoulders, holding 2 mugs of cider. She handed one to Dominic and sat beside him, their knees brushing, their breath visible in the crisp air. She found a ladybug colony under the oak tree, he murmured, still watching their daughter. She gave it a name. "Let me guess. Something very scientific?" "Ladybug City," he deadpanned. Sky chuckled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "She's going to change the world." "She already has," he said softly. The silence between them now wasn't awkward or cold or tense the way it once had been. It was full, rich, like soil that had been turned and planted time and time again, and grown something alive. "You know," Sky whispered, "sometimes I still think about that day, when you offered to marry me. I almost walked out." "I know," he said. "I saw the look on your face. It was memorable. Why didn't you pick someone easier?" He turned his head, kissed the top of her curls. "Because I wasn't looking for easy. I was looking for something real. And you were the only thing that scared me." She smiled against his shoulder. "You were terrifying, too. You still are. In boardrooms. And when you make pancakes. They're efficient," he defended. "They're soulless." He laughed, and the sound echoed into the quiet woods. Lark ran up to them, leaves in her arms. "Mom, Dad, come see Ladybug City." Dominic stood first, then reached out a hand to Sky. She took it, warm and familiar and worn in from all the years they'd spent building a life they never expected to share. Together, they walked through the leaves toward their daughter, toward something future-facing, chaotic, alive. Not a perfect life, but a chosen one. And in the end, that mattered more than anything a contract ever could.